So say for example, you have a ring like this. And if we go over here, you can see if I slide this on here and clamp it down, it's going to have a pretty significant overhang. So when I'm setting the bezel at that end, when I push on that, there's a chance that I could bend this ring. So what do? Well, I use this stuff here. And now you don't have to use this particular product, but when you get it, it comes in this little granulated pellets here. And the best part about this is that it's reusable. So I've saved old chunks here. You can see some of the imprints in there. So it's very hard, but it's not marring. So it has maybe the hardness similar to JB Weld once JB Weld set up. However, if I want to reuse some, I just pop it in here. I've got some water boiling here. Pour boiling water over the top until it's completely submerged. And then you're going to wait a few minutes for it to soften up. So I'm going to pause the camera and come back when that's ready. In the meantime, I went ahead and clamped this ring down. Now, this ring is obviously done. This is one of my solar system rings here, but it involved bezel setting stones, and if you've bezel set stones before, you know it involves a significant amount of force around the edges. And here we have a significant overhang. So what we're going to do is put some Jett Sett underneath here and then clamp it around the ring so that the ring won't rotate as we're pushing around on these sides and these end pieces here. So it's been about a minute here, and you don't want to just stick your fingers in there because it's boiling water. It's starting to be pliable around the edges here. That's looking good, but this middle part where it was thicker still isn't very squishy. So I'm going to put it back in there for about another minute. While we're waiting on that, here's another example of something you can use it for. I had this texturing hammer, which I like, but the handle broke. And so I just added my own stick. And I added some Jett Sett as a handle because I wanted to form a front where these finger grips hold, and it just matches my hand exactly. That way I would know if I was gripping it this way without looking at the hammer. Because sometimes I'm looking through a microscope. So I can feel whether or not I have it in my hand the correct way just by matching the grip to my fingers. So that's another good use for it, making more handles. So let's go ahead and check this, see how it's doing. That's pretty good and squishy all the way through. So now we're going to move over to our fixture. I'll reset the camera over there. All right. Once you get it out, you got maybe about a minute or so at most of working time here before it's going to set up harder and not stick to itself. So at this point, it won't stick to metals, especially cold metals, but it can get in the nooks and crannies of things and be very difficult to clean out. So here I've got this, and now you can see I've created a nice shelf under the end of my ring. I've also wrapped it around the ring a little bit and pushed it into the texture here so that as I'm working on this, if I'm trying to push on the top to the side or this way, if you've ever worked with one of these before, no matter how hard you clamp these down, they can still rotate if you're pushing hard. And if you clamp them down too hard, you can expand or crack your ring shanks. So this is another good way of keeping that from happening. And even as I'm talking here, you can see I can still tint it with my fingernail. It's starting to get hard. The coldness of this vise will help it to set up faster. So we'll come back in a few minutes and we'll check and see how that looks. All right, while we're waiting for that to set up, I want to show you my micro bezel setter, which I use for getting some of these smaller stones down there in the nooks and crannies. You can see they're way down in there, and a normal bezel rocker wouldn't be able to fit in there. So I took an old beading tool, which is used for pushing prongs. And I just flipped it over and I put it in one of these handles. You can buy these handles in bulk for quite cheap. And I simply, normally I have this pounded in here, but I pulled it out to show you what it was. And now I have a very small bezel pusher, which I can use for getting down into these smaller areas. And every now and then I just go ahead and re-round this end here. So to make it smooth, you can also, because these things are, you're going to have tons of these, you can use old burrs as well. So if you have an old worn down burr, you can just break off the end, flip it over, and that makes a great little bezel pusher. So it's been about 1.5 minutes here, and this is still in the thickest part a little bit pliable. So before working on this, I'd try and be patient and probably go ahead and wait a good 5-10 minutes until it was rock hard. But you can see it's gotten to the point now where I can push on this, and I have confidence that I can push on this really hard and not have a problem. So once you're done with the piece, it's important to keep in mind that in order to then remove this, unless you put it on in such a way that the ring isn't, that you can pull it off easily, you're going to need to remove the entire thing. So I'm going to unclamp this here, and we're going to pull the entire thing off of here. And I can leave that on there for now. I don't need to take that out. But it's important that whatever stone you're setting or metal you're using, it needs to be able to go in hot water. So we're going to go back to the hot water. So I got my jar here. I'm going to carefully set that down there. I've got my hot water cooking here. So we're going to go ahead and put some hot water back in there. Because I have a lot more mass in there right now, I have added more water than I normally would. So again, we're going to wait a little bit here until it gets soft. Now, the hotter the water is and the longer you wait, in other words, the hotter this stuff gets, the stickier it tends to be. So if you're working with a really delicate piece with lots of wires and thin areas and crevices, then this stuff can definitely get stuck in there. So you can see here, it can get kind of stringy. But at certain temperatures, it becomes just soft and pliable, almost like Play-Doh. So you can test it regularly and see how it's doing. In this case, I simply need to unwrap it from the outside here, and it came right off. You can see here, there's a little bit still stuck on there, but that's not a problem, because as it dries, it will become hard, but it won't stick anymore. So we're going to let this completely cool off, and then it will just peel off. So we'll go ahead and pause that again. Alrighty, it's been another 1.5 minutes or so. Ring's dry. I blew it off using some compressed air. And now I can simply slide my fingernail along here, and it just comes off into this one solid piece here. And along here. And now there is no more, a little bit over on this side. Important to always look. Sometimes it can blend in, especially if you're working in silver. All right, looks like that does it. I'll give it another inspection under my microscope before bringing it back up to the office. But that's Jett Sett. So this stuff used to be something that was done using a pitch bowl, where very similar, you would heat it up and then you could conform it around your workpiece. It would solidify, and then you could work on your piece, heat up again. This is a more modern product. It's basically a thermoplastic, and why I keep calling it Jett Sett, that's because that's what this is called, and I like to recommend it because it's what I use. But I know there are plenty of other companies that make a similar product that would also work just fine as well. So that's that. If you're interested in this ring, it's on my website for sale. And the Jett Sett can be purchased from Rio Grande, last time I checked. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching.